Hello, I'm Jeremy Bessoff, and welcome to Art 3550 Animation for Summer Online Session 2. Where should we begin? Well, I think we should start at the beginning. This lecture is going to focus on pre-cinema animation, which is animation that is made before automated mechanical reproduction, i.e., the camera and movie projector. In order to understand how animation works on a fundamental level, we'll briefly look at how motion is perceived in human vision and how we can manipulate it. Then we'll take a look at some devices that predate cinema. This will help us understand that we can break motion down into workable chunks. They're called frames. Then we'll hear from a preeminent film scholar, Tom Gunning, on the rise of projected imagery as a mass-consumable product, starting with the magic lantern. We'll then talk briefly about thaumatropes, zoetropes, kinographs, praxinoscopes, and mutoscopes. Oh my. And if you don't know what those are, we'll be describing them in detail in a few slides. Once this section is finished, we'll move on to building your own scientific instrument / toy to demonstrate the building blocks of the mechanical illusion of life with your very own thaumatrope. Ready? Let's go! So before we can begin understanding what animation is, let's first touch on how our brains perceive the idea of motion. So what is this phenomenon of experience motion, and how does it work in film and animation? Well, first let's find out about what motion perception is not. Once we have the fiction out of the way, we can focus on a quick bit of scientific fact. You may have heard of a theory called the persistence of vision. It's an early theory which has been refuted. So when you hear someone talking about persistence of vision, you can gently remind them that it was refuted around 1914. But when people are talking about persistence of vision, their theory states that images persist in the vision system during the intervals in between frames, thereby causing them to be perceived as continuous. So what that's saying is, it's imagining an image projected in your eye and then staying in your eye until the next frame is introduced. Well, it just doesn't really work that way. The major piece of evidence against the persistence of vision is the phi phenomenon. The major piece of evidence against the persistence of vision is the phi phenomenon. In order to simplify a rather complex physiological process, let's break it down into two small elements. Number one, the phi phenomenon itself, and number two, something called beta movement. The phi phenomenon is an optical illusion, and what it's doing is it allows us to see motion in things that don't move. So we're perceiving continuous motion between separate objects viewed in rapid succession. When we change a still image in the same place in rapid succession, we get the illusion of motion. What's important to remember in the phi phenomenon is that motion, the motion of the rapidly changing image, has to happen in the same physical space. So think about the projection of a piece of celluloid or actual physical movie film. There are 24 images changing every second in the same space to convince us there's motion. So let's look at an example. Let's take a look at what a thaumatrope is so we can physically see this phenomenon in action. Here it is, folks, the thaumatrope. Its name roughly translates as wonder turner. It comes from the ancient Greek wonder and turn. You can also interpret it as turning marble. Its construction as you can see, is terribly simple. It's just a paper disc with one image on either side and then rotated rapidly. It's often been credited to the astronomer Sir John Herschel, but as we'll see in a second or two, he was about 30,000 years too late, because his version of the thaumatrope, as we know it, came out around 1825. But let's stay in the Common Era for now. There's still some debate, however, of which gentleman was the quote-unquote first inventor. Herschel may have invented it, but it was a well-known London physicist, Dr. John A. Paris, who made this toy popular. He was also the person that mass-produced the thaumatrope object and made it possible for the average person to experience the wonders of motion. Let's take a quick trip back in time about 30,000 years or so, and let's check out some ancient cave drawings in France. The images that you see here were drawn by prehistoric Stone Age artists. And what's really remarkable about them is the fact that they didn't just draw multiple animals, they attempted to draw the same animal in motion. So these cave people were trying to make cartoons 30,000 years ago with nothing but burnt sticks scratched into a cave wall. From an article on Seeker.com, it says researchers, by about 30,000 years ago, Paleolithic artists used animation effects, in quotes, in their paintings. To render the movement, they deconstructed it in successive images, which, if you've been paying attention, sounds a lot like a frame to me. According to the researchers, this would explain multiple heads or limbs on some cave paintings. The researchers suggest that prehistoric man or woman foreshadowed one of the fundamental characteristics of visual perception. And it's said that when the paintings are viewed by flickering torchlight, the animated effect achieves its full impact, meaning the pictures come alive with fire, which is another way to say projected light. And you're probably not going to believe this, but researchers found a thaumatrope made out of bone in one of the caves. It's a bone carved into a disc with animals scratched into both sides. Now the animals are shown in different positions. It looks like it may be running or lying down. And if we rotate it quickly, like a thaumatrope, we've got animation. So cave people 30,000 years ago were doing animation. Wow. Now, we won't spend much more time on this, but if you want more prehistoric action and an in-depth tour of the caves, check out Cave of Forgotten Dreams by Werner Herzog. If you haven't watched any of his films, he's amazing, weird, and very entertaining on an existential level. So now that we've got phi out of the way, let's talk about beta movement. It's very simple. Imagine you're in downtown Chicago looking at the Chicago Theater at night. You stand transfixed in front of this glowing monolith, and the lights seem to move and pulse and live on their own. They seem to be running around the sign, defining the sign. This is an excellent example of beta movement. Beta movement, as opposed to phi phenomenon, is the optical illusion of perceiving movement between separate objects in physical space and time. So with the phi phenomenon, we had an image being replaced in the same space rapidly. Here, the image, or light in this case, is simply blinking on and off in a series of predetermined patterns. So what's happening is the light or image is not staying in a fixed single place, like a movie projector would work, or a video screen. In this case, it's a series of lights sequenced in space, meaning that there are light bulbs spaced one next to each other, and they light up in sequence. For example, the first one lights up, then goes dark. The second one lights up, then goes dark. The third one lights up, and you guessed it, goes dark, and the next one turns on. You'll be familiar with this kind of movement, the beta movement, through animated neon signs and movie marquees. It's really all around you. For this class, we won't be focusing on the beta movement. We'll just be looking at the phi phenomenon. But I wanted you to be familiar with the two types of the kind of animation perspective we can have in our toolbox. Before we go any further on our tour of pre-cinema devices, I'd like to jump in the Wayback Machine again, not 30,000 years, just 100 or so, and talk about the magic lantern. To mix things up a little, I'm going to let Tom Gunning, the preeminent film scholar, explain to you what a magic lantern is, how it worked, and why it's an important apparatus to be familiar with during our tour of pre-cinema objects. So without further ado, pause this presentation and take a look at the link Pre-Cinema 2 Gunning, located in the weekly content section of Blackboard. And we're back, and hopefully you know everything there is to know about magic lanterns. Let's take a look at the phenakistoscope from 1829. The etymology comes from the Greek. Phenakizin, and please excuse my Greek pronunciation, it means to deceive or cheat. And the idea of it is it deceives the eye by making the objects in the pictures appear to move. Take a look at figure P on the slide presentation to see how the thaumatrope was actually used back in 1829. We'll see more of this in action as Disney demonstrates it to us in a later video. It uses a spinning disc attached vertically to a handle. Arrayed around the disc's center were a series of drawings showing phases of the animation, and cut through it were a series of equally spaced radial slits. The user would spin the disc and look through the moving slits at the disc's reflection in the mirror. The scanning of the slits across the reflected images kept them from simply blurring together, so that the user would see a rapid succession of images that appeared to be a single moving picture. The slits function as a sort of rudimentary shutter. In this video example that's playing, the phenakistoscope has been animated digitally to eschew the use. In this video example, the phenakistoscope has been animated digitally to eschew the use of a mirror and handle. And it's nice we can just see it digitally on the screen. Unlike zoetropes and possibly thaumatropes, the phenakistoscope could only practically be used by one person at a time. So that is the sticking point with this technology. It's a solo show. There's no communal watching in this case. And now the flip book. Everybody is probably familiar with this one when you were doodling in the corners of your math book, making someone jump off a diving board or something. The first flipbook appeared in 1868 and was patented by a guy named John Barnes Linnet. He patented under the name kinograph, which literally means moving picture. These were the first form of animation to employ a linear sequence of images rather than a circular one, such as in the older phenakistoscope. Check out the link for a modern and very wacky take on the kineograph. The zoetrope. This is when things start to get really interesting. Much like the thaumatrope, the zoetrope was thought to be originally created way before the Western world discovered it. It was created in China around 180 AD by the inventor Ting Huan. Please excuse my Chinese pronunciation. Ting Huan's device was driven by convection, which means that there was a heat source, most likely candles, that hung over a lamp that he called the Chu Hua Chik Quan, which means the pipe that makes fantasies appear. The air-turned vanes at the top from which translucent paper or mica panels hung. When the device was spun at the right speed, the pictures painted on the panels would appear to move. Don't have a picture of this one, just a description. So if anybody has one, please send it my way. The modern zoetrope was invented in 1833 by British mathematician William George Horner. He called it the Daedalum, most likely as a reference to the Greek myth of Daedalus, though it was popularly referred to as the Wheel of the Devil. Everything people don't understand, they attribute it to the devil. Well, the Daedalum failed to become popular until the 1860s, when it was patented by both English and American makers, including the game company Milton Bradley. What's really cool about the zoetrope technology is it allows for some fun modern interpretations of it in 3D. So we can take 3D objects in an animated sequence and place it on a turntable. If you light it with a strobe light and turn the turntable, the strobe light acts as the shutter for bringing the animated sequence alive. Check out the link Pre-Cinema 4 Zoetrope for a really cool example of a 3D zoetrope in action. The praxinoscope. The word praxinoscope translates roughly as action viewer from the Greek. The praxinoscope as an animation device was the successor to the zoetrope. It was invented in France in 1877 by a gent named Charles-Émile Renault. Like the zoetrope, it used a strip of paper placed around the inner surface of a spinning cylinder, and that paper had a sequence of images on it. The praxinoscope improved on the zoetrope by replacing its narrow viewing slits with an inner circle of mirrors, placed so that the reflections of the pictures appeared more or less stationary in position as the wheel turned. Someone looking in the mirrors would therefore see a rapid succession of images, producing the illusion of motion with a brighter and less distorted picture than its predecessor, the zoetrope. A little later on, Renault built a large-scale projectable praxinoscope. It was with this device that he performed the very first public performance of animation. And we'll see Renault in action in a moment. Let's do the pause and play thing and check out the Pre-Cinema 5 POVRA link. There you're going to see an actual representation of what the performance of the praxinoscope may have looked like. It's recorded from the original cells of the animation. And last but not least, let's talk about the mutoscope. The mutoscope was an early motion picture device patented by Herman Kassler in 1894. Like its competitor Edison's kinetoscope, which we didn't look at, it does not project on a screen, and it only provides viewing for one person at a time. The American Mutoscope Company, later named American Mutoscope and Biograph Company, quickly dominated the coin-in-the-slot peep show business. Yes, that's right. For a small fee, you can see some smut. Mutoscopes were a popular feature of amusement arcades and pleasure piers in the UK until the introduction of decimal coinage, which killed it in 1971. The coin mechanisms were difficult to convert, and many of the machines were subsequently destroyed. Some were exported to Denmark, where pornography had recently been legalized. The typical arcade installation included multiple machines offering a mix of genres for your pleasure. Mixture usually included girly reels, which ran the gamut from risque to outright softcore porn. It was, however, common for these reels to have suggestive titles that implied more than the reel actually delivered. The title of one such reel, called What the Butler Saw, became a catchword, and mutoscopes since then are commonly known in the UK as What the Butler Saw machines. What did the butler see? Let's take a look through the keyhole and find out. Let's switch tones now from the lascivious What the Butler Saw to the down-home family fun of Disney. Through the following link, Disney is going to give you a really brief tour of the animation toys that we just talked about. It's from a TV show called Disneyland that aired in the late 50s, early 60s. And once you're done watching, go ahead and take quiz 1. Won't be too tough. 10 questions, multiple choice, true, false. Super easy. Okay, good luck and see you in the next video.